This is a Fox News alert. I'm Brett Baer in Washington. Two major stories breaking at this hour. A missile hit a Malaysian Airlines commercial plane carrying 295 people, causing it to break up over embattled eastern Ukraine. There are no survivors. The plane was shot out of the sky. We still don't know exactly who fired that missile, but senior U.S. officials tell Fox they're ruling out that it was fired by the Ukrainian military. And just in the last few hours, Israel has launched a ground incursion and air bombardment in the Gaza Strip. That on the heels of Palestinian rocket fire that broke a ceasefire and a wave of retaliatory Israeli airstrikes. We begin with the story that had been the story of the day. U.S. intelligence officials confirm a Malaysia Airlines jetliner was shot down by a surface-to-air missile. The burning wreckage of that flight that originated in the Netherlands bound for Kuala Lumpur is scattered over a wide area in eastern Ukraine. To sort out what we know at this hour, we have Fox team coverage tonight. Jennifer Griffin looks at the geopolitical impact. Ed Henry with reaction from the administration as the Obama foreign policy is still under fire. But first, senior foreign affairs correspondent Amy Kellogg has details of this developing story. Hello, Amy.
Brett, this is the first time that the conflict between Russia and Ukraine has spilled over to affect citizens of a third country in any significant way. And ahead lies the very daunting prospect of an investigation and recovery operation in the midst of a conflict zone. Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur with 295 people on board was apparently shot down in Ukraine between the towns of Snizhne and Torez, about 20 miles from the Russian border.
The Ukrainian authorities believe that the plane was shot down. At this stage, however, Malaysia is unable to verify the cause of this tragedy.
Ukraine's president says the Boeing 777 was shot down and not by his forces.
I would like to bring your attention to the fact that we are not calling it an accident or a disaster, but an act of terrorism.
Ukraine's security chief went a step further, saying he had phone intercepts between Russian military intelligence officers he claims were involved in the attack, discussing the downing of the plane and then finally the realization that they had shot down a passenger aircraft. Meantime, around the time of the crash, the military leader of the Donetsk People's Republic on social media boasted that his forces had shot down a Ukrainian Antonov 26 transport plane in the exact spot where the Malaysian flight came down. Shortly after, that social media post was deleted. Various rebel spokesmen subsequently denied responsibility for the crash, blaming instead Ukraine's army. The separatists have shot down planes before, as recently as yesterday. Back in June, they shot down a transport plane, killing 49. They shot down another plane Monday. Rebels do claim they have found the plane's black box and have indicated they will hand it over to Russia. President Obama has offered condolences and help to Ukraine. So has Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Malaysian Prime Minister said that he has spoken to the Ukrainian president about creating a humanitarian corridor to the crash site. He also said, Brett, that the next of kin of the victims can be flown to Kiev if they want to travel to Ukraine. He said the investigation must not be hindered in any way. Brett.
Amy Kellogg live in London tonight. Amy, thank you. Now to national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin with a look at what this downed aircraft means for the international stage.
Senior U.S. intelligence officials confirmed late today that Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 was shot down by a sophisticated Russian-made surface-to-air missile known as a Buk system, which can fire into the air up to 72,000 feet. And although U.S. officials are still trying to determine from where the missile was launched, many in Washington are already pointing fingers at the Russians. One senior defense official told Fox News, quote, "If this was done by the separatists, it was done with Russian assistance, whether direct or indirect, whether they just gave them the weapons or trained them on how to use them."
You don't give sophisticated toys to thugs and over time expect it to turn out well. And Putin, at the end of the day, Putin is the guy responsible for what happened today.
Some on Capitol Hill are pressuring the administration to respond.
We must react in a stringent fashion because Vladimir Putin is clearly been fomenting this situation in eastern Ukraine, even recently sending in additional troops and additional equipment for the, quote, separatists.
More lawmakers are likely to increase that pressure on the White House if indeed there were 23 Americans on board, as the flight's manifest suggests.
We do not have any confirmed information about casualties, the cause, or additional details.
Yesterday, President Obama announced sanctions on the Russian company that manufactures the Buk missile system. A deleted Twitter post from June 29th, when Russian separatists overtook a Buk missile base in Donetsk, eastern Ukraine, shows a photo of the Buk missile launcher that the Russian-backed separatists claim to have captured.
If there's any silver lining in this unspeakable tragedy, it may be exactly the issue that gives President Putin great pause, and that he really does begin to get control over these separatists.
A senior U.S. intelligence source tells me they are ruling out the missile was fired by the Ukraine military, but cannot rule out that it was fired from the Russian side of the border. The source says it was likely an SA-20 or SA-11 Buk missile. Russian separatists took control of an SA-11 a few weeks ago. Now U.S. intelligence analysts are following the missile's trajectory and will be able to determine exactly from where it was fired. Brett.
Okay, Jennifer, we'll check in for any breaking details. Thank you. Another Fox News alert: ground operations are underway right now in Gaza. After a brief pause in operations ended with Hamas rockets and mortars being fired, the Israelis engaged. Correspondent John Huddy is in Gaza City, where he's been all night there with the very latest. Hello, John.
Yeah. Well, Brett, it's day 11 now on the ground here of Operation Protective Edge, and it's really the day that we've all been anticipating, the day that Israeli ground forces move into Gaza. And at this point, all night, we've been hearing heavy artillery fire coming from the west, offshore cannon fire, from the north. Heavy artillery, 105 millimeter cannons, 155 millimeter howitzers, and then also from the east as well, as now ground troops have pushed their way in to northern Gaza. We've also seen and heard the airstrikes and choppers circling, jets circling as well. And what seemed like a window of opportunity for peace earlier today with that ceasefire was slammed shut, as now the fighting and ground offensive has begun. It appeared this morning the ceasefire would end before even beginning. A dozen Hamas fighters tunneled under the Israeli-Gaza border, emerging near an Israeli community with RPGs, AK-47s, and other weapons. The military believes this was a bold attempt to infiltrate, kill, and possibly kidnap Israelis. Israel and Hamas agreed to the 5-hour ceasefire to allow the United Nations to bring relief supplies to Gaza. Today was the first time hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who have been holed up in their homes for the past 10 days were finally able to get back to some semblance of normalcy without fearing for their lives. The crowd scrambled to withdraw money from the ATMs before the ceasefire ended this afternoon in Gaza.
You can see how crowded and chaotic it is here. People are literally crushing in the line to try to get money out of the ATM machine that's been closed for more than a week. This was the first chance you got, and you had to push your way in there to get some money out.
This is the only way that you need to do it for this situation.
And in the afternoon, once the humanitarian break was over, Hamas rockets were launched again. In return, Israel resumed its airstrikes. Another 18,000 reserve troops have been called up, Brett, bringing that total number to 58,000 troops, many of which are now on the ground fighting here in Gaza City. Brett?
John Huddy live there in Gaza City early Friday morning. John, we'll check in with you in just a bit. Thank you. Today's takedown of that Malaysia Airlines flight further complicates an already full foreign policy plate for President Obama. Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry has that part of the story from the White House.
President Obama went forward with his planned schedule of 2 fundraisers in New York tonight, calling the Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko aboard Air Force One on the way. Earlier, the president was pushing for more highway funding in Delaware, where he stopped in at a barbecue joint.
I hear the burger's pretty good.
And paused for 38 seconds to note the downed passenger jet.
It looks like it may be a terrible tragedy. Right now, we're working to determine whether there were American citizens on board. That is our first priority.
The president also had Vice President Biden call Poroshenko to offer U.S. assistance, including a team headed to the region to determine what happened.
And there are many questions that need to be answered, and we'll get those answers, and we will take the next steps accordingly.
The president heard about the crash from Russian President Vladimir Putin, who passed along air traffic control reports during a phone call to discuss U.S. sanctions. The White House said the president pressed Putin on, quote, extensive evidence that Russia is significantly increasing the provision of heavy weapons to separatists in Ukraine. Meanwhile, as Israel led an offensive into Gaza, Secretary of State John Kerry was on the phone late today, urging restraint with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, all playing out just 3 days after White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest told Fox some of the president's policies are making the world more tranquil.
How does the White House react to the notion that the president is a bystander to all these crises?
I think that there have been a number of situations in which you've seen this administration intervene in a meaningful way that has substantially furthered American interests and substantially improved the tranquility of the global community.
Republicans today warned Kerry is now likely to push the president to extend nuclear talks with Iran beyond Sunday's deadline.
With so many foreign policy disasters like the shoot down of this airplane on the watch of the airplane of this administration, he's going to be really backpedaling fast.
Late last year, in order to stop a bipartisan effort led by Democratic Senator Bob Menendez to issue new sanctions against Iran, the president publicly promised if the talks with Iran did not bear fruit by July 20th, he'd ready new sanctions. Today, State Department spokeswoman Jen Psaki suggested that may be changing, tweeting, quote, @John Kerry does not support additional nuclear-related sanctions while we negotiate, because it would not be productive to the negotiations.
Now, very interesting, on that call with the Ukrainian president, the White House says Mr. Obama stressed all evidence from the crash site has to stay inside Ukraine so that it's not tampered with. But as you heard Amy Kellogg report earlier, the separatists are already claiming that they've taken a black box or black boxes to Russia. Big problem potentially tonight, Brett.
Definitely. Ed Henry live on the North Lawn. Ed, thank you. We will follow both these stories throughout the show tonight. Up next, accusations the Justice Department is dragging its heels investigating the IRS scandal. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates across the country are covering tonight. Fox 29 in Philadelphia covering a top aide to New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, who says she did not alert any of her bosses when she learned about the closure of lanes leading up to the George Washington Bridge last year. Regina Agia testified before a panel investigating the closures dubbed Bridgegate. KTTV with a federal judge in Southern California who has ruled the state's death penalty unconstitutional. The ruling follows a similar one in Northern California that has kept the death penalty on hold in the state for years. And this is a live look at Seattle from our Fox affiliate there, Q13. Big story there tonight. Rapidly spreading wildfires fueled by wind and triple-digit temperatures. So far, it's chased nearly 900 people from their homes there. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report on a busy news night in Ukraine and Gaza. We have it all. We'll be right back.